Evelyn Harper didn't ask for attention. She didn't carry a cane or a camera, just a faded jacket and a history no one seemed to care about, until one teenager noticed her patch, and a jet pilot broke formation to say the word she hadn't heard in 70 years. Thank you for your service. What would you have done if you heard someone mocking a veteran like Evelyn? Tell us in the comments. The smell of jet fuel hung in the crisp mountain air as waves of people funneled through the gates of the Blue Ridge wings of Valor Airshow. It was barely past 10 in the morning, but already the crowd swelled with energy. Families tugging at maps, kids begging for cotton candy, veterans in caps nodding silently to one another as a distant rumble of aircraft echoed overhead. Evelyn Harper walked slowly but purposefully down the tarmac with her granddaughter, Mira, by her side. The crowd parted easily around them. At 86, Evie didn't need assistance. Her back was straight, her gait steady. She wore a faded bomber jacket, zipped against the chill, the wool collar turned up slightly. A small U.S. flag was stitched above the heart. Below it, in more muted thread, a circular patch with a winged gear and the letters WF nearly worn smooth. Mira checked her phone as they moved past a vintage plane exhibit. I think the Thunderbolt demo starts in an hour, she said, glancing over. You sure you don't want to sit? Evie shook her head. I'll sit when I can't stand. Mira gave her a smirk and pocketed the phone. Classic answer. People passed them with glances, a few quick looks at the jacket. Most thought nothing of it. Some probably assumed it was a replica or part of a costume. But not everyone. Lena Briggs, 16, stood a few yards away, bouncing slightly in place with the energy only a teen with caffeine and a lifelong obsession with planes could muster. Her eyes swept the crowd, but when they landed on Evie's jacket, she froze. She stepped forward, hesitant but determined. Excuse me, she said, almost tripping over her words. That patch, is that real? Evie turned, meeting the girl's wide eyes with calm curiosity. It's real. Lena's jaw dropped. The Women's Auxiliary Air Force? From the 40s? That's incredible. I've only seen pictures of that patch in museums. Evie smiled, just a twitch of the lips. Most of them belong there now. Lena glanced at Mira, then back to Evie. Did you serve? I maintained aircraft, Evie replied. Not glamorous work, but necessary. Roger Gill stood a few feet behind Lena, sipping a soda and looking generally unimpressed. Tall, broad-shouldered, and loud, Roger had the look of someone who never stopped believing high school had been his glory years. The moment he heard Evie speak, his eyebrows lifted. Maintained aircraft? He repeated, stepping closer. What? Like fix up a couple model kits. Lena turned, frowning. Evie remained still, eyes on Roger, not defensive but watchful. Roger motioned toward the jacket. Come on, that patch is probably off Etsy. You expect people to believe an 80-year-old woman was turning wrenches on warbuds. Mira stepped forward, her voice calm but cold. You should back off. Roger chuckled, not backing off at all. Hey, I'm just saying, cosplay is fun and all, but let's not rewrite history for attention, yeah? Lena's cheeks turned red. She's not cosplaying. That's an original 1940s WAF issue. You can tell by the threading. And there are barely any of those left. Roger scoffed. Sure, and I'm a retired astronaut. Evie looked him over once, then turned away. Roger's voice carried a little louder now, clearly enjoying the scene. I mean, what's next? She's gonna say she took down the Luftwaffe with a wrench and a prayer. Several heads turned. A few people nearby were watching now, some curious, others uncomfortable. Lena opened her mouth to reply, but Evie raised a hand slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was the kind that made noise. From a distance, the engines of an incoming jet rolled through the air like thunder over the hills. A faint cheer rippled through the crowd as the first flyover passed. 3 vintage aircraft in formation. The sun flashed off their wings. Evie tilted her head back to watch them, her eyes steady as the metal birds passed overhead. Her expression didn't change. She had seen too many of them in too many different skies. Roger shook his head and walked off and muttered, "Unbelievable." Lena looked after him, then back at Evie. "I'm really sorry about that guy. Some people just don't get it. Evie returned her gaze to the sky. It's all right. I didn't come here to be seen. Mira looked over, something unspoken in her eyes. You never told me you served. Evie was quiet for a moment. The planes had vanished now, leaving only the hum of the crowd. There are things people either don't ask about, she said softly, or they ask for the wrong reasons. Lena nodded slowly, almost reverently. You're the real thing, aren't you? Evie didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned and began walking again, toward the next row of displays, toward the thunder she understood better than most. Mira followed, still processing what she'd just learned. Lena stood where she was, rooted for a few seconds. Then she pulled out her phone, not to take a selfie or record the planes, but to start a search. She wanted to confirm what she already believed, that the patch on that jacket wasn't a costume, and the woman who wore it had more right than anyone to stand in the front row. As the crowd refocused on the show overhead, Evie blended back into it, not because she was unnoticed, but because that was how she preferred it. She didn't need applause. She'd been surrounded by the sound of engines, metal, and grit long before this generation learned to cheer for it. She didn't come for a tribute. She came to remember. And sometimes, remembering meant standing exactly where history could find you again. The crowd swelled as the flyover passed, and people clustered near the barrier tape lining the front row. Evelyn Harper stood just behind it, hands folded neatly in front of her bomber jacket. Her breath puffed gently in the cool air, but her eyes tracked the skies with strange calm, neither excitement nor awe, but something else entirely. Mira stayed beside her, glancing occasionally between her grandmother and the soaring planes. She had never really seen her like this before, so still, yet alert. A few paces off, Lena Briggs hesitated, clutching a small aviation field guide against her chest. The girl had noticed the patch the moment Evie stepped near the tarmac, the unmistakable wing gear insignia of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. She'd seen photos of it, read articles, even tried bidding on a replica patch online once. But this one wasn't new. It was old, the kind of old that couldn't be faked. She stepped forward carefully, her voice soft but eager. Excuse me, ma'am. Your jacket. That's a WAF insignia, right? Evie turned slightly, her face unreadable. Her eyes rested on the teenager for a few seconds, then dropped briefly to the field guide Lena carried. It is, she said. Lena's mouth opened slightly. You were in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force? Evie's expression didn't change. I didn't fly. I fixed what the boys brought back broken. The words felt clean and simple, like bolts tightening into place. Mira blinked. She turned toward her grandmother, startled. You were in the military? Evie's eyes remained on Lena. We weren't called military back then. Not officially. But we did what had to be done. There was no pride in her tone. No bragging. Just fact. Lena looked like she might drop the guidebook. That's amazing. I've only read about the mechanics from back then. I didn't know any were still alive. Evie gave a small shrug. Some of us are still around. Most keep to ourselves. Mira shook her head slowly. You never told me. Not once. It didn't come up, Evie replied. Before Mira could say more, a loud laugh pierced the air behind them. Well, isn't that cute? Came a voice rich with sarcasm. They turned. A tall man in his 40s, stocky and broad-shouldered, approached with soda in hand and a smirk plastered across his face. His baseball cap was slightly tilted back, revealing a weathered forehead and thinning hair. A red lanyard labeled Airshow Crew bounced against his chest. Let me guess, he said, nodding toward Evie. Fixed some bikes for the boys during the war, did you? Evie said nothing. Mira frowned. She was an aircraft technician during the Second World War. The man snorted. What? She twisted a few bolts in the garage. Lena stepped forward. No, sir. That's a real WAF insignia. Wartime issue. That's not the kind of thing you get at a gift shop. Roger glanced at her, amused. Relax, kid. I'm just saying, she's what, 90? That would have made her what, 10 during the war? Evie tilted her head slightly. I'm 86. Roger whistled. Still standing strong, huh? He chuckled. looking around at the small group forming near them. Must be all that aircraft maintenance. Builds character. Myra's tone sharpened. Are you here to mock people, or do you actually work at this event? He took another sip of soda and shrugged. I'm crew. Ground ops. Don't worry, I'm off the clock. Just saying, there's a lot of folks who dress up in vintage jackets try and look the part. It's a thing now. I didn't come to look the part, Evie said, her voice quiet but firm. Roger raised an eyebrow. Sure you didn't. A few bystanders had started to turn their heads. Not many, just enough to make the air feel slightly heavier. Lena looked furious. You have no idea what you're talking about. Do you know what it took for women to get into aircraft maintenance during the war? They weren't even issued proper uniforms at first. They worked in the cold, the dark, sometimes under blackout orders while bombs fell. And you think she's faking because she wore a jacket? Roger looked at her, unimpressed. You read that in a book? I read in archives. She snapped, with names. Records. Some of those names are still alive. She turned back to Evie, her voice gentler. I believe you. I really do. Evie gave the girl a slight nod. Thank you. Mira stared at her grandmother for a moment, then turned to Roger. You're not just being disrespectful. You're being loud about it. Go make your jokes somewhere else. Roger held up his hands mockingly. All right. No need to get defensive. I just call it how I see it. He backed away with an exaggerated grin, finishing his soda as he disappeared into the crowd. A brief silence settled between them. Lena exhaled, clearly still fuming. Some people think history is just movies, costumes. They don't get that it was real. That people like you were real. Evie didn't respond right away. Her gaze drifted toward the next wave of aircraft approaching from the west. They only see the part that flies, she murmured, not the parts that held it together. Mira stepped closer to her, the weight of realization slowly setting in. Why didn't you ever say anything? I mean, we talk all the time. Holidays, birthdays. Evie's lips pressed into a quiet smile. You never asked. The air rumbled again as the sound of approaching engines rose in the distance. The crowd began to shift forward. Lena checked her watch. That's the Thunderbolt. Should be the first run. Evie's eyes were already on the horizon. The roar of the A-10 built slowly, like a train cresting a hill. She didn't speak. She just watched. And as the aircraft passed overhead, thunder cracking against the mountains, a strange sort of stillness came over the three of them. The moment had moved on, but it left something behind. The roar came in low, long, and thunderous, a sound that didn't just echo but press against the chest and reverberated in the bones. The crowd turned almost in unison, eyes pulled skyward as the unmistakable profile of the A-10 Thunderbolt II streaked in from the east. Sleek, brutal, and impossibly agile, the aircraft sliced through the blue with a grace that contradicted its firepower. Here he comes, someone near the front muttered, shielding their eyes from the glare of the sun. Captain Jake Maddox, known in the U.S. Air Force by his call sign Reaper, gripped the stick of the Warthog as he prepared for first high-G turn. Inside the cockpit, everything was controlled, calculated. Outside, it looked like raw power tearing the sky in half. Maddox wasn't just a skilled pilot. He was a showman, known for pushing the limits of maneuverability during demos. His routines had a reputation for precision, aggression, and spectacle. The aircraft banked sharply left, wings nearly vertical, then arced into a tight climbing spiral. Cameras clicked like machine guns from every angle as people gasped, pointed, and clapped. The distinctive growl of the General Electric GU 8/A Avenger cannon thumped from the belly of the aircraft in a simulation of a strafing run. No live rounds, but the sound alone was enough to trigger adrenaline. Evie didn't flinch. Her hands remained in front of her, fingers gently hooked together, eyes calmly following the A-10's path. Mira watched her sideways again, silently comparing her grandmother's poise to the trembling excitement of the crowd around them. It was like Evie wasn't just observing the show, she was measuring it. A few feet back, Roger returned. He had a fresh drink, a toothpick in his mouth now, and an expression that said he'd shaken off the earlier exchange without a second thought. As the Warthog buzzed the field again, doing a rapid roll before leveling out, Roger smirked and leaned toward the small cluster near Evie. Bet she thinks that's a P-38, he said loudly. The humor meant to sting more than amuse. A few heads turned. One man frowned at him. Lena's jaw tightened. Evie didn't react. Come on, Roger went on, undeterred. Back in her day, wings were made out of plywood and prayers. You really think she can tell the difference? She can, Mira said evenly. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't even look at him. You just like talking louder than you listen. Lena spoke up this time. That's an A-10C Thunderbolt 2. Twin turbofan engines. Straight wing design. GU. 8/A Avenger rotary cannon. You can hear the spin up even from the ground. Roger raised an eyebrow. What? You got a pilot's license now. No, Lena replied, but I know what I'm looking at. Another roar cut off the conversation. The A-10 screamed in for another pass, this time diving at a simulated angle before flattening out just above the runway and rolling on its axis. The tail markings shimmered in the light, silver gray, with a stylized skull beneath the canopy. Reaper's unofficial insignia, Jake Maddox. Lena said to no one in particular, her voice filled with admiration. He's one of the best. Roger nodded mockingly. Yeah, real show-off. Flips his toy around, and people treat him like he's Superman. Because he is flying machine built to survive direct hits and still bring the pilot home. Lena shot back. And it's not a toy. Relax, Roger said, sipping his drink. I'm not saying the guy is not good. I'm just saying it's all flash. Bet our friend here thinks he's pulling a dogfight over Europe. He nodded again toward Evie, whose eyes remained on the sky. She knows more than you think, Mira said, sharper now. Evie's voice came out clear, almost too quiet for surrounding noise, but it cut through just the same. It's not about flash, she said. It's about what a plane can do when it's already been through hell. Roger blinked, caught off guard. Another pass. This time the A-10 climbed into a vertical ascent, paused, hovering like it had no business staying in the air that long, then twisted hard into a nose-down spiral. Children clapped. Cameras rose again. A small boy behind Evie shouted, "It's like it's falling on purpose." Lena grinned. That's called a controlled stall. Only the A-10 can do that and recover without losing lift. Reaper nails it every time. Roger looked up, then back down. "I guess that's cool," he muttered. Evie finally turned toward him, eyes steady but not hostile. "You ever hear a plane scream?" Roger hesitated. "I mean, they're loud." "No," Evie said. "Scream. Not engine noise. Not wind. The sound of metal under pressure. When the flaps twist wrong. When the fuselage strains. When something's about to give." Roger didn't answer. Evie continued, her voice soft. "I've heard it. And every time that sound happened, someone had to figure out whether it meant the end of the plane, or if it could be brought back." Mira was silent, watching her grandmother as if seeing her for the first time. Lena swallowed hard, still staring skyward. The A-10 pulled one final turn, blasting across the runway at low altitude, then shot straight upward into the sky, and disappeared momentarily in a burst of cloud vapor. The crowd erupted with cheers, whistles, and applause. For a brief second, the air show grounds were filled with nothing but sound. Roger folded his arms. "Okay, I'll give it to him. That was something." Evie nodded once. "He flies like he knows what the aircraft can take. That's rare." The announcer's voice boomed from the speakers, echoing across the field. "That's Captain Jake Reaper Maddox, flying the A-10 Thunderbolt 2, a master of precision and performance. Let's give him another round of applause." The crowd responded with renewed clapping and cheers. Evie's gaze didn't leave the sky. Roger looked at her again, a touch less arrogant now. "So, you really worked on those old birds back in the day, huh?" Evie didn't look at him. We didn't have announcers. Or crowds. She turned then just slightly, enough to face him. Just wind and silence, and hope that what you fixed held together. Roger nodded once, more thoughtfully than before, and fell back a step. Lena looked from him to Evie, visibly moved. Mira took a slow breath, her hand brushing against Evie's. The A-10 had vanished into clouds again. But for a moment, the air felt different, charged, still, almost sacred. They stood there, watching, waiting. And in that moment, the sky didn't seem quite so far away. Lena stormed away from the crowd, her sneakers pounding over the gravel path as she moved with the kind of fury only a young person with a righteous cause can muster. She pushed through a cluster of air show volunteers near the snack tents, eyes scanning for control area. Beyond the flight line fence, a white tent with a red crosshatch roof stood near the communications trailer. Headquarters for today's show logistics. That had to be it. She ignored the curious glances and whispered questions trailing behind her. Her grip tightened on her phone, knuckles white. She was not going to let this slide. Not here. Not today. Inside the tent, 2 officers and a tech were gathered around a display screen showing the live aerial feed. Charts, weather data, and pilot communications buzzed quietly in the background. One of the officers, a tall man with captain's bars, glanced up when she entered. "Miss, this area is restricted," he said, not unkindly. "I know," Lena blurted, "but I need to say something just for a minute, please." The second officer, shorter and older, folded his arms. "You can't be in here." "It's important," Lena insisted. "There's someone out there in the crowd being mocked. She's wearing a WAF jacket with a 1940s issue badge. I just watched a man humiliate her in front of others. He works here, he's crew, Raj or something." The tech gave her a sidelong glance, mildly curious now. Lena held up her phone, tapping through her photo gallery before thrusting the screen forward. "This is a patch she's wearing. I found a match from the RAF Museum database. It's a frontline mechanic's insignia, issued only between 1942 and 1944. You couldn't buy one even if you wanted to. They were earned." The younger officer leaned in slightly. "She a veteran?" "She said she didn't fly," Lena replied, breath catching slightly. "She fixed planes. Said she worked on what the boys brought back broken." There was a pause. A flicker of something passed through the taller officer's eyes. "She was calm," Lena added, voice quieter now. "Didn't yell, didn't fight back. But she was real. You could feel it." The older officer sighed, clearly trying to decide whether to dismiss her or listen further. "And you want us to do what exactly?" "I don't know," Lena admitted, blinking. "Say something. Acknowledge her. Make it right. She shouldn't be standing out there being treated like some old lady in costume." She was there. The tent was silent, except for the background chatter of the radio. The younger officer looked toward his colleague. "Captain?" The captain hesitated, then turned toward the sound console behind them. He adjusted the mic slightly, his fingers brushing the bass. He hadn't said he'd do anything, but the action suggested a consideration, a possibility. "Hold," he said suddenly. The tent flap rustled open. Evelyn Harper walked in slowly, not with drama, but with a purposeful calm that quieted the air. She didn't need to be fast. She didn't need to be loud. The very fact that she entered with her back straight and her chin lifted was enough. Mira appeared just behind her, breathless but silent. She didn't try to stop her grandmother, didn't try to explain. She just followed, like she somehow knew this moment didn't belong to her. Evie looked around the tent, eyes resting briefly on each man before landing on Lena. She gave the girl a gentle nod, gratitude without embellishment. Then she reached into the inner pocket of her bomber jacket and pulled out a thin plastic sleeve card. It was old, faded. The edges had softened from time and handling, but the ink still bore clear letters. The photograph inside showed a much younger version of Evie, 20, maybe 21. With tight curls tucked under a cap, her face defiant in that particular way wartime women had to master. The official WAF crest was visible in the top left corner. The signature was handwritten, crisp and unmistakable. "Evelyn Harper," she said, offering the card to the captain. "Maintenance crew. Number 57 Repair Unit. Nordholt Airfield. 1943 to 1945. The captain took it slowly, holding it like something delicate. He examined the seal, the date, the ink. The older officer stepped forward, peering over his shoulder. His brows lifted. I haven't seen one of these in person since museum duty in Lincolnshire. Evie remained still. The captain handed the card back with care. This is original? Evie nodded. They only issued one. I'd lose mine. Silence stretched across the tent. Even the radio seemed quieter. Lena shifted, her heart pounding. Mira stood straighter behind her grandmother, caught between awe and disbelief. The tech glanced between them all. Sir, if you want to say something, now might be the time. Thunderbolt's next pass is in 90 seconds. The captain turned back to Mike. His fingers hovered again, this time with clearer intent. He looked once more at Evie. Would you be all right with that? He asked. If I said something? Evie paused for a beat, then gave a soft nod. Say it true. He adjusted the mic. Copy that, he said to the tech. You're patched in. Then he pressed a button. Across the airfield, speakers crackled to life as people continued to watch the sky, waiting for the A-10's return. The crowd murmured, distracted. The engines were audible in the far distance, but not close yet. The captain's voice came low and even over the loudspeakers. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could have your attention for a brief moment. Just now, standing among you, is someone who served in a way many forget, but none should. People began turning, looking around. She didn't fly. She didn't carry a weapon, but she stood at airfields under threat, working through smoke and silence, fixing machines that brought our people home. In the tent, Evie didn't move. Neither did Lena or Mira. She is a former member of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, number 57 Repair Unit, stationed in Nordholt. Her name is Evelyn Harper. Outside, the crowd fell almost completely silent. One by one, people began turning toward where Evie had stood minutes before. They searched, curious, stunned. She didn't ask for recognition, but she deserves it. And today we offer it. The A-10's engines came into range again, this time slower, almost hovering, its approach deliberate. The mic clicked off. Evie breathed in slowly, her fingers grazing the old car before slipping it back into her jacket. Lena turned toward her, eyes bright. You didn't have to come up here. I know, Evie replied, but you did. The captain stood tall. Thank you, Ms. Harper, for everything. Evie met his eyes and gave the smallest nod. You're welcome. High above the airfield, Captain Jake Reaper Maddox pulled into a high-speed vertical climb, the A-10 Thunderbolt 2 cutting through the clouds like a blade. The pressure pushed into his chest, but the control stick responded smooth and firm. His fingers were precise, every movement second nature. The sound inside the cockpit was a careful balance of radio chatter, engine hum, and breathing. Reaper, this is ground command. A voice came through the comms, calm but urgent. Jake eased out of the climb and leveled the Warthog into a wide left turn. Go ahead, ground, he replied, scanning the horizon. There was a moment's pause. Then, we've just confirmed something. There's a World War II veteran in the crowd. Women's Auxiliary Air Force. Maintenance Division. She served on frontline bases. Jake blinked. That was rare. The voice continued. She's wearing her original jacket. Some guy gave her trouble earlier. Crowd saw it. Jake's jaw set. You said WAF? Affirmative. Evelyn Harper. Identification's been verified. Command gave a brief recognition over the PA a moment ago. Jake glanced down at the sprawling field below. Ants from this height. Dots and shadows stretching across a sea of lawn chairs, picnic blankets, and camera lenses. Somewhere down there, Evelyn Harper was watching. Quietly, probably, his fingers tightened around the stick. Copy, he said, voice low. This show just changed, fellas. He switched channels. Tower. Reaper requesting voice override to public address for 30 seconds. There was a beat of hesitation. Reaper, say again? I've got a dedication to make. Another pause and, approved, you're patched in. Jake took a breath. The A-10 dipped slightly in preparation for a rolling maneuver, but he held off. He clicked on the override. Below, the crowd heard a sudden shift in the speaker feed. The background music faded, and a new voice filled the air. This is Captain Jake Maddox, call sign Reaper. The field hushed. People looked up, eyes scanning. I was going to roll into my next pass, but something more important came up. Before I continue, this next flight, this whole performance, is for Evelyn Harper. Lena, Mira, and Evie stood just outside the tent, heads lifting as the voice cut cleanly through the crowd. Evelyn turned wrenches when the world was at war, Jake continued. She kept our birds in the sky, while bombs dropped and engines screamed. She served when it was hard, when it was thankless, and when no one thought twice about it. More heads turned now, searching for the woman the voice honored. She didn't ask for a stage, Maddox said, his voice carrying steady warmth. But she sure earned one. Evie blinked slowly, a calm expression remaining on her face. But her posture changed, straighter somehow, as if an invisible weight had lifted. In the cockpit, Jake clicked back to his flight channel. Let's give her a show worth remembering, he said to himself, throttling forward. He pulled the Warthog into a wide arc, then dove. The aircraft tilted into a sharp corkscrew roll before leveling just feet above the ground in a full-speed run. The GAU, 8 cannon word, simulated burst only, thundering a low growl across the airfield. But this time, it wasn't just performance. It was tribute. The crowd erupted. Jake flipped the A-10 into a climb again, climbing hard into a full-loop maneuver before dipping over the far trees and circling back around. Every move was tighter, sharper. He wasn't just flying. He was narrating a story without words. A story that, decades ago, Evelyn Harper had helped make possible, one rivet, one wrench, one engine at a time. Back on the ground, Roger stood off to the side, arms folded. His expression had changed. He wasn't smiling, wasn't scoffing, just watching, very, very still. Lena glanced over her shoulder, briefly meeting his eyes. Roger looked down. Jake's second pass came in low again, but slower now. As he buzzed the field, his voice returned over the PA one last time. Evelyn, we fly because you did your job first. This is for the ones who fix what others broke and never asked for applause. The A-10 pulled into a wing-over maneuver, slicing across the sky in a high bank turn. Thunder rolled behind him. Evie watched the sky with quiet awe, her hands folded loosely in front of her. Mira leaned slightly closer to her. Did that ever happen when you were in uniform? Evie smiled faintly. No, we worked behind the line. But we always knew someone was counting on us. That was enough. Lena didn't take her eyes off the Warthog. Not anymore, she said softly. Now they know. Jake wrapped the routine with a final high-speed climb, flipping the aircraft into a half-roll and streaking toward the clouds. The Warthog vanished for a breathless second, then reappeared with a sharp turn, leveling back into formation position as the performance drew to a close. Applause rolled like a wave across the field. No words were needed now. Jake Maddox clicked off the mic and exhaled. He didn't need a standing ovation. He didn't even need to land right away. But as he banked westward for the final exit route, a quiet pride settled in his chest. Today hadn't been just about aircraft agility or crowd-pleasing roles. It had been about remembrance. And for once, the sky made room for that. On the ground, people were still clapping as Evie stood still, watching the A-10 disappear into the sun-washed horizon. The breeze moved lightly through her jacket, the same one she'd worn more than 70 years ago. Lena looked at her, eyes shining. Was it strange hearing your name over speaker like that? She asked. Evie shook her head. Strange? No. She looked up one more time, eyes soft. Just overdue. The A-10 Thunderbolt circled high above the field, engines humming as it set into a holding pattern. From the ground, it looked like a bird of prey, calculated, waiting for its moment. People still clapped in waves, others quiet, some stunned, holding phones aloft as if hoping to preserve a moment too large for their screens to capture. Captain Jake Maddox had one more pass in him, and this one would not be part of the planned routine. Reaper, this is Tower. You're clear for one final pass. What are you planning? Maddox didn't respond immediately. His gloved hand moved to adjust the smoke system lever. The cockpit instruments glowed in the afternoon light, but his focus remained on the ground below. He could see the crowd. Thousands of faces turned skyward. He couldn't see Evelyn Harper from this altitude, but he could picture her clearly. She hadn't flinched when her name was called. She didn't grandstand. She didn't cry. She just stood there, like she stood decades ago, in oil-stained overalls with war thundering overhead. She had already shown more strength than anyone else here. He banked left gently, nose tilting toward the crowd again. Tower, Reaper. Executing mechanic salute. Clear the eastbound corridor. Smoke system going hot. There was a beat of silence on the radio. Copy that, Reaper, came the measure response. Corridor cleared. You're approved. Back on the ground, the crowd's movement slowed again as the A-10 repositioned. Evie watched with narrowed eyes, something distant stirring beneath her calm exterior. Mira noticed a change. What is he doing? Mira whispered. Evie didn't answer immediately. She just watched. Lena, standing close, was also focused upward. He's coming in slower. The aircraft emerged from behind the western tree line, banking low. Very low. It descended smoothly, intentionally, drifting barely above the grass line. The engine note dropped into a low growl, its presence vibrating through the ground. Then, something even airshow regulars didn't expect. The A-10 flipped slowly, methodically, until it was fully inverted, wings level with the grass, smoke trails pour behind in symmetrical, ghost-like ribbons. Its position was just above legal altitude clearance, the belly of the plane nearly scraping the invisible safety limits. People gasped audibly. Phones and cameras went up in a flash. Others simply froze, stunned. The A-10 crept forward in that inverted posture, crossing directly in front of the main crowd. The smoke trailed behind like gray silk, curling in the breeze but keeping formation. Controlled chaos. The aircraft held the upside-down pass for several long seconds before Maddox slowly rolled back upright, cutting the smoke at the exact midpoint of the field. The nose dipped, then lifted once in a signature tilt as the plane climbed gently out and away from the crowd. Then silence. No narration followed. No music played. Just the sound of wind and the fading echo of engines. People didn't know whether to cheer or remain reverent. Lena finally exhaled. Was that what I think it was? Evie's voice came softly. Mechanic salute. Mira looked confused. Is that a thing? Evie nodded once. Rarely done. Too hard. Too risky. Meant for the crews who never saw the spotlight. Pilots only do it when it matters. The quiet held a few moments longer before someone began clapping. Then another. A small cluster at first. And then it grew, rippling through the crowd until the entire field erupted into full, thunderous applause. Not the whoops and cheers of a daring stunt, but something deeper. Respect, recognition. Roger, standing near the rear edge of the crowd, felt like a punch to the chest. He'd been there from the beginning, laughing, mocking, smug in his assumption that an old woman wearing a flight jacket couldn't possibly be real. But now his confidence had drained. He stood rigid, hands in his pockets, eyes darting between the applauding spectators and the smoke trail still curling in the sky. People had moved past him, around him, toward the center line where Evie stood, quiet and composed. Some offered glances of disbelief in Roger's direction. Others just ignored him entirely. He felt himself shrinking in place. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was exposure. As the clapping intensified, Roger took a small step back. Then another. He slipped between two family groups and edged toward the maintenance tents, trying to blend in. His face was pale, jaw clenched, but no one followed him. No one called him out. That wasn't the point anymore. The story had moved beyond him. Back at the field's front edge, Evie stood tall, still watching the path the warthog had cut through the clouds. She didn't need to say anything. The salute had said it all. Lena turned to her. Have you ever seen that done before? Once, Evie said. A.B. 25 pilot over Normandy. 60 years too late. He said it was for the ones who were never named. Mira looked up at the sky. Well, you've got a name now. Evie smiled faintly. I never needed one. The smoke trail lingered for several long minutes, dissipating slowly into the afternoon blue. People began to mill again, voices returning, but the mood had shifted. Quieter, more reverent. At the back of the crowd, a young boy on his father's shoulders asked what the upside-down plane meant. The father explained softly, saying it was for someone who helped keep others flying when the world was broken. Evie didn't hear the conversation, but she didn't need to. Her gaze remained skyward for one last moment before she nodded once, as if answering an old question that had finally been laid to rest. "Ready to go?" Mira asked. "In a minute," Evie replied. "I just want to remember this." Lena stood beside her, hands in her jacket pockets, quietly honored just to be near. The A-10 disappeared over the horizon, and the sky, now emptied of its thunder, held only the smoke's final breath, drifting like the memory of a salute long overdue, and finally seen. The applause still echoed faintly as the last trail of smoke vanished into the sky. People began to shift again, some still clapping quietly. Others murmured among themselves, voices lowered in the presence of something more profound than spectacle. The rhythm of the air show had changed, not because of an unscheduled maneuver, but because of the reason behind it. Evelyn Harper stood quietly near the front rows, her expression unreadable, hands folded together as if in patient reflection. Lena remained at her side, glancing around at the crowd, many now staring, not with doubt but with dawning respect. From the announcer's booth, movement stirred. A figure stepped down from the temporary tower. A tall man in dress blues with silver trim, his expression serious but calm. He cut across the crowd without haste, people parting as he passed. Colonel Trent. He'd been watching everything. The confrontation, the verification, the tribute. He'd served 3 tours himself and could recognize the way to legacy when it appeared unannounced, dressed in an old jacket with stitched insignia and hands folded like they'd held it all together once before. He stopped just short of Evelyn, straightened, and removed his cap. "Miss Harper," he said with warm gravity, "it would be an honor if you joined me." Evie looked up at him with a measured calm. "Why?" Trent offered a slight smile. "Because too many times we recognize the wrong people too loudly and the right ones too late. I'd like to fix that, at least today." Evie didn't move at first. Then she nodded once. Lena helped her step forward, but Evie's stride was steady, strong. The crowd slowly quieted again as they realized what was happening. Phones returned to pockets. Hats were removed. People turned not just to look, but to make room. Colonel Trent gently offered his arm, and Evie accepted, not for support, but for ceremony. Together, they made their way across the tarmac toward the tower. Every few steps, someone in the crowd would nod respectfully. A few clapped softly, then stopped themselves, sensing applause was no longer needed. Reverence had replaced ridicule. From the announcer's platform, a young airman adjusted the mic. Stepping aside, Trent climbed the steps beside Evie and then turned toward the crowd. The portable speakers clicked and hummed as the mic came to life again. Trent cleared his throat, voice even and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know you came here today for speed, noise, and flight maneuvers, and I promise we'll return to that. But something more important happened today, and it deserves your attention." All eyes turned forward. He continued, "Down there in the crowd stands Miss Evelyn Harper. She didn't ask for the spotlight. She didn't demand recognition. In fact, she spent most of her life without it." He looked at her for a moment, then back to the audience. In the 1940s, while bombs fell over Europe and pilots risked everything in the skies, there were others behind them, on the ground, in cold hangars and open airstrips. With hands numb from the cold, they patched fuselages, rewired flak damage systems, and made sure aircraft would go back out again. There was a silence in the crowd, deeper than before. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice softening, "was one of those people. She served with the Women's Auxiliary Air Force Mechanic Division. She fixed bullet holes in Spitfires. She worked while air raid sirens screamed. And when the planes came back broken, she sent them back whole." A murmur moved through the audience. Not one of confusion, but realization. Trent placed his cap back on his head and stepped aside. "She never asked for thanks," he said. "Let's give it anyway." The crowd stood in silence. Then, slowly, organically, it began. One person near the front clapped once, then another, Then a ripple of applause spread again, this time without the rush of adrenaline or the thrill of spectacle. It was quiet applause, thoughtful, earnest. Evie stepped forward to the edge of the platform, scanning the faces before her, not with pride, but with peace. Her eyes didn't seek validation. They simply acknowledged what was finally being seen. Mira stood below the booth, eyes wide. She watched her grandmother tend roses in the garden, knit scarves during the winter, and sip tea while reading the newspaper. Never once had she imagined her doing anything close to what had just been described. The woman who always kept her shoes perfectly polished had once worked under Spitfires soaked in mud and fuel. "Why didn't she ever tell me?" she whispered aloud, barely enough for herself to hear. Because she didn't need to, Lena thought beside her. That was never the point. Evie raised a hand, just slightly, just enough, and the clapping eased naturally. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her expression said more than words could. Trent leaned close. "You can say something if you like." Evie shook her head. "I've said all I needed to, a long time ago." Trent understood. As they stepped down from the booth, people cleared a wide path, not out of distance, but out of deference. A few saluted. Some placed their hands over their hearts. Others simply nodded, their eyes locked on the woman who had, until an hour ago, been invisible in plain sight. Mira moved forward as Evie reached the bottom. "Grandma?" Evie turned to her, smiling gently. "I didn't want you to think I was brave," she said. Myra's voice cracked. "Why?" Evie looked out across the crowd, at the planes, at the sky that once bore the scars of war. "Because I wasn't the one in the cockpit," she said. "I was just the one who made sure they got back into it." Colonel Trent smiled quietly behind them, nodding in full agreement. Lena stepped forward. "You were more than brave. You were the reason others could be." Evie looked at her granddaughter, then at Mira. She didn't respond. But she didn't need to. The crowd gradually resumed its motion, the sound of the next announcement barely audible under the hush of what had just passed. The show would go on. But for everyone who had been there, something larger had happened between the smoke trails and the silence. A reckoning. A thank you. And at long last, a moment earned by hands that once worked without pause, praise, or promise of remembrance. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting streaks of amber and violet across the airfield. Most of the crowd had trickled out, buzzing about smoke trails, aerial maneuvers, and the unexpected tribute that had stolen the day. But near Hangar B, a quiet, older structure set apart from the chaos, something more intimate was unfolding. Inside, the clatter and hum of the airshow faded into soft murmurs and the occasional rustle of folding chairs. The space smelled faintly of grease and old canvas, like time had settled in and never fully left. A semicircle of cadets, air base staff, and curious guests filled the hangar floor. They weren't here for planes. They were here for Evelyn Harper. Evie sat on a well-worn wooden crate in the center, flanked by Lena and Mira, who had set up a small camera on a tripod. Lena adjusted the lens gently, nodding with focused satisfaction. "All right, Grandma. Ready when you are." Evie smirked faintly. "Don't expect speeches. I'm not Churchill." The cadets chuckled lightly. Mira reached out and gave her grandmother's hand a soft squeeze. "Just tell them the truth. That's all they need." Evie took a breath. Not deep, not dramatic. Just steady. She looked around the room. "You all saw the smoke trails out there." The inverted salute. "It was beautiful. It really was. But what I did didn't look like that, and it didn't feel like that either." Her voice was low, gravelly, touched by age but grounded in clarity. "I was 19, barely out of training, when they posted me to an airstrip in Kent. Planes came in shredded, sometimes still smoking, sometimes with a pilot inside who didn't make it. They'd roll the bodies away while we got to work. No time to mourn, just rivets, patches, oil." No one spoke. A few cadets leaned forward, eyes wide. There was one night, October 1943. The base was blacked out. We heard engines rumbling in the distance. I remember one of the boys yelling, "Get the covers on the lights." And then she raised a hand and clicked her fingers. It started. Bombs. One right after another. Whole hangar to the left of us collapsed. We lost 2 fitters that night, Billy and Rose. They were sweet on each other. Evie paused, her lips tightening. They'd just gotten engaged. Lena adjusted her headset silently, blinking fast. Mira sat frozen, hands clasped. Evie continued, eyes focused somewhere not present. But we didn't get to sit with grief. The very next day, 8 Spitfires rolled in with damage. One had both wings torn up, flak shrapnel everywhere. We worked straight through until morning. A cadet in the front row, barely 20, whispered, "Why didn't they pull you out?" Evie smiled softly. There was no they to pull us. No one else was coming. We were it. Girls from farms, from factories, from cities that got bombed the week before. You didn't ask for easier posts. You didn't complain. You just worked. A long pause settled in. Even the distant hum of a generator seemed to still. Evie looked down for a moment. I remember this when Hurricane came in, pilot didn't make it, but his dog tags were stuck behind the throttle lever. When we opened it up, they clinked out and hit the floor. She swallowed gently. We cleaned the blood, patched the fuselage, and got that plane flying again. But I kept the tags for a bit. Just a little longer than I was supposed to. Felt like someone needed to. Lena's camera light blinked steadily. She didn't blink. One cadet raised a tentative hand. "Did anyone ever thank you?" Back then, Evie gave a quiet laugh, not bitter, but dry. "No, not really. But we didn't do it for that. We did it so someone else could get back in the air. That was enough." Myra's eyes welled as she leaned forward, barely whispering, "You're more than a hero. You're a history." Evie turned, her gaze softening. "Sweetheart, I'm a story like thousands of others. Most never got told." Lena spoke now, her voice a little hoarse. "But we're telling it now." Evie gave her a nod. "Then tell it right. Don't dress it up too much." The grit mattered. Another cadet asked, "Were you ever afraid?" Evie nodded slowly. "Yes, not of dying, of forgetting, of going home and people not believing it happened, that it was all uniforms and parades. But it wasn't. It was cold steel, bloody cloth, busted hydraulics, and fingers that wouldn't stop shaking after the siren stopped. There was silence, heavy, but not uncomfortable, a reverent hush. Outside, the last of the sunlight slipped behind the hangar's edge, casting long shadows across the cement floor. Inside, the light hung low and golden, wrapping the room in a kind of timeless warmth. Lena turned off the camera and lowered the lens gently. Evie exhaled, folding her hands over her knees. That's probably more than anyone needed to hear. One of the cadets shook their head firmly. "No, ma'am. That's exactly what we needed to hear." The group remained still for a while. Some wrote in notebooks. Some didn't move, as if letting the weight settle fully before standing. Mira leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I'd known this sooner." Evie smiled gently. "Now you do. That's enough." As people slowly stood and filed out into twilight, a few stopped to offer soft thank yous. Not loud, not showy, just sincere. Hands clasped, brief nods, the kind of gratitude words alone can't carry. Evie didn't rise yet. She stayed seated, watching the light change against the rafters. For decades, her story had lived quietly in memory, in shadow. Now, for the first time, it lived in voices, in ears, in film, in history. The hangar doors creaked open with a low metallic groan as the last sliver of daylight faded behind the airstrip. The late evening cast the tarmac in a soft, lavender hue. The air was still, a calm in the aftermath of emotion. Word had spread quickly, and a handful of people still at the airshow moved deliberately now, no longer chasing spectacle, but drawn by respect. A slow rumble rolled over the concrete as the A-10 Thunderbolt was gently towed into position, its engines long quiet, but its presence just as commanding. The distinctive shark mouth painted across its nose was now flanked by something new. In bold, blocky letters freshly stenciled just beneath the canopy were the words, "For the fixers." A few heads turned as a tall figure in flight, gear approached from the side hangar, his helmet cradled under one arm. brown hair tousled from the headset he'd worn all day. Captain Maddox. Evie stood nearby, hands folded lightly in front of her. She hadn't spoken since the last cadet left the hangar after her talk. Her energy had shifted, not tired, but quieter, like an engine finally idling after running warm for hours. "Miss Harper?" Maddox said, stopping a respectful distance away. Evie turned, her eyes meeting his with practiced calm. She gave him a nod. "Captain." He stepped forward slowly, extending his hand. "Ma'am, I've pulled this bird to more flight hours than I can count, but I've never had a reason to fly prouder than I did today. You held the line so we could fly. Ma'am, this one's for you." Evie reached out and took his hand. Firm grip, steady shake. She gave a small smile. "That's kind of you, son. But I didn't hold any lines. I just made sure the lads had something that wouldn't fall apart in the sky." "That is holding the line," Maddox replied without hesitation. Mira and Lena stood just behind Evie. Lena's camera was off, hanging by her side now. No filming, no posing. This moment wasn't for an audience. It was for history. Maddox gestured toward the side pocket of his flight suit. "I know this is unusual, but there's only one other name on my suit besides mine and my squadron. Would you do me the honor of signing it?" He unzipped the pocket flap and pulled it open slightly. Just beneath his unit patch was a faded black marker signature. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas V. Maddox, his father's name. Evie blinked, her gaze softening. "I keep a marker in here," Maddox said, pulling out a thick black permanent pen. "Carried it around for years. Never used it again until now." Evie looked at the patch, then at Maddox. "You sure you want this old signature ruining the symmetry?" "Positive." With steady hands, Evie took the marker. She crouched slightly, placing one hand on the patch for balance, and wrote carefully beneath his father's name. E. Harper, WAF 1941-45. Fix what matters. She stepped back and handed the marker to Maddox, who looked at the writing, nodded once, then gave her a sharp, silent salute. Evie chuckled. "That's very formal, Captain." Maddox's voice was low, steady. "It's meant to be." From behind them, several members of the ground crew had gathered, quiet and respectful. One of them whispered. They wheeled her jet out front. Evie turned, and her eyes widened slightly. The A-10 stood angled toward the runway lights, now beginning to glow in the dusk. The newly stenciled message on the nose caught the amber gleam. For the fixers, Mira let out a slow breath. They really did that. "They did," Lena whispered, snapping a photo without the flash. "They should have done it years ago." Someone from the crowd, a young technician with grease still under his fingernails, stepped forward, holding something wrapped in a cloth. He approached Evie gently, like approaching a relic. "Ma'am, this belonged to my great-aunt. She worked under WAF command at RAF Biggin Hill. Thought, maybe you want to see it." He unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a faded armband, blue and gray, the letters WAF stitched in worn thread. Evie took it slowly, her fingers brushing the fabric like it might vanish if touched too roughly. "Biggin Hill," she murmured. "Tough post. Constant raids." The technician nodded. She never talked about it, not until right before she passed. Evie folded the armband gently and handed it back. "Tell her story. People need to hear the quiet ones." "I will," he said, his voice catching slightly. Maddox cleared his throat softly. "Would you stand with the A-10, ma'am? Just for a few photos? I'd like the base to have it in our archive." Evie glanced at the aircraft. "Haven't posed next to a warplane in 70 years. Mira grinned. "Well, you're about to break that streak." They walked together, Maddox, Evie, Mira, Lena, and a handful of crew. As they reached the A-10, someone gently offered Evie a step stool, but she waved it off. She walked up beside the nose gear and rested a hand on the metal fuselage, just beneath the shark mouth and the tribute stenciling. The camera shutters were soft, almost reverent in their rhythm. No crowd cheers, no fanfare, just the sound of history being preserved. Finally, properly, Lena whispered, "Grandma, can you look this way?" Evie turned slightly, and in that moment, the orange runway light hit her profile, strong, lined, proud. It was the face of a woman who'd done her part, silently and without medals, and now stood in front of a modern warbird bearing her legacy. Maddox leaned slightly toward Mira. "You proud of her?" Mira blinked fast, nodding. "More than I can say." The last photo was taken as Evie placed her hand, just briefly, over the stenciled words on the A-10, "For the fixers." Then she stepped away and looked out at the field. Quiet as ever, the night was beginning to settle in, but Evie didn't seem cold, just still. She turned to Maddox. "Don't let the stories fade, Captain. Planes aren't the only things worth preserving." "No, ma'am," he said. "They're not." And with that, the group began to drip back toward the hangars. Not quickly, not with fanfare, but with the silent weight of having witnessed something rare. A salute not just in the sky, but in steel, ink, and memory. The sky was a canvas of late afternoon gold, and the hum of anticipation rippled through the crowd like an electrical current. The last act of the air show had been teased for hours, but no one knew exactly what was coming. Not until now. Out past the far end of the tarmac, the rumble began, low and steady, like distant thunder. It swelled with each second. One by one, specks appeared over the horizon. At first, only sharp-eyed enthusiasts spotted them. Then the entire field turned skyward. A formation of jets, F-22s, A-10s, and F-16s, burst into view, arrowhead sharp, slicing through the clouds. Just behind them, and much slower, followed 3 World War II aircraft. A P-51 Mustang, a Supermarine Spitfire, and a restored B-17 Flying Fortress. Their engines growled with a distinctly older timbre, mechanical, raw, alive. The announcer's voice crackled through the speakers. But this time, it wasn't the usual list of aircraft stats or pilot bios. This final flight, the voice said, solemn and clear, is not only for the pilots who dance the skies, but for the ones whose names were never painted on fuselages, those who turned the wrenches, who welded the ribs, who patched the holes and waited through silence. There was a pause. A collective hush fell over the crowd. This is for Evelyn Harper, WWII 1941 to 1945, and every man and woman who made sure our aircraft would return home. The formation overhead shifted. The jets throttled back, making space for the slower World War II planes to take the lead. The growl of old engines dominated the soundscape now. The P-51 tipped its wings. The B-17 trailed white smoke, forming a halo that glowed in the fading sun. Mira stood near the front of the crowd, one arm wrapped around Lena's shoulders. Neither of them spoke. The only sound from them was the occasional sniff, the quiet exhale of emotion too full to voice. Just behind them, Evie stood tall in her beige jacket, the now iconic WWII insignia shining under the sky's warm tones. She had politely declined a chair despite offers. She didn't need to sit. Not for this. Lena reached into her camera bag without taking her eyes off the sky and pressed record. But this wasn't for content. It wasn't for likes. It was for legacy. When the planes finished their pass, they began to arc into a wide, synchronized loop. As they turned, the sun caught their frames at just the right angle. Dozens of phones rose in the crowd to capture it. But the moment wasn't made for screens. It was felt in the air, in the hearts of those watching. Do you think she ever imagined this? Lena asked softly. Mira shook her head, voice tight. I don't think she ever asked for it. Down near the front barricade, a few children had clambered onto their parents' shoulders. One of them, a boy no older than 9, looked at Evie and asked, "Is she the one who fixed all the planes?" A nearby woman, maybe his mother, nodded. She helped the ones who did. Yes. Evie overheard. She smiled but said nothing. She simply kept watching. The announcer continued, more quietly now. History often forgets the hands behind the wings. But today they are remembered. Behind the scenes, the day's events had already sparked movement. Maddox had submitted a request to include Evie's story in official base history. Colonel Trent had reached out to the British Embassy. But perhaps the most lasting legacy was forming in Lena's editing software. Titled The Ones Who Kept Us Flying, The project had started as a single video, but after the hangar talk, Lena realized it was more than a clip. It was a documentary, part family history, part tribute, part correction of a long overdue record. She and Mira worked together. Scripting, voiceovers, archival photos, narrations from Evie herself. They found others too, voices of silent builders, forgotten mechanics, and radar women from around the world. The opening scene was already chosen. Evie's fingers running over the A-10s for the fixer's stencil. And the ending? That was being filmed right now. Lena panned the camera slowly. The airshow crowd remained unmoving, as if pinned by reverence. The aircraft now faded into the distance, their trails stretching like threads between eras. But her lens settled on the figure, standing alone at the runway's edge. Evie, not flanked by microphones, not surrounded by admirers. Just her, standing quietly. There was no nostalgia in her expression, no wistful longing for youth or better days. What filled her face instead was something deeper, pride, not in being recognized, but in knowing that what had been buried had finally surfaced, that the quiet mattered. She didn't wave to the sky or raise a hand. She simply looked upward, eyes sharp as ever. Watching. Behind her, Mira whispered, "I wish Grandpa could see this." Evie heard it and answered without turning. "He does." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, like the pause between pages in a history book finally being turned. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, families folded blankets and packed up chairs, but many lingered. People approached Evie gently, not for autographs, but for handshakes, for thank yous. "I didn't know," a young man said, "about the ground crew. They never told us that in school." "They're telling you now," Evie replied. Lena turned off the camera. She'd gotten what she needed. She didn't want to intrude anymore. "We'll make sure they remember," she said, to no one in particular. Beside her, Mira nodded, not just what they flew, but what they stood on. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the floodlights flickered on across the runway. The golden glow disappeared, replaced by cool silver. But Evelyn Harper remained for a moment longer, bathed in both lights, the past and the future. And when she finally turned and walked away from the runway edge, she did not look back. She didn't need to. The sky had already carried her story. What was your favorite moment in this story? Was it the flyover, the salute, or the quiet strength of Evelyn Harper standing alone by the runway? We'd love to hear what moved you most. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that not all heroes were wings. Some held the line with tools in hand.